Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Tuesday, December 22nd. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Sugar Bowl against Clemson is in 10 days. The game against Michigan in 340 days. There are a million storylines headed into the Sugar Bowl. Monday, we got another interesting one as Dabo Swinney's final coaches poll ballot came out. He had the Buckeyes ranked 11th in the country, just outside the possible playoff field. That went over real well with Ohio State fans. It's probably something that will come up within the walls of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center a time or two between now and kickoff as well. My guest today is Matt Connolly. He is a Clemson beat reporter for the State newspaper in South Carolina. Matt, thank you for joining us.
Yes, sir. Of course. Thanks for having me.
Now, we'll get to Dabo's ballot in a minute because that's what everyone's going to want to hear about. But first, we were talking right before we hit record, and I said, I feel like this has been a weirder year for us than it has been for you. Because, Ohio State has had the on again, off again thing with the Big Ten. Are they going to play? Are they not? And Clemson's just kind of like, they've been playing the whole time. You made a good point. You got to do something fun that we didn't get to do this year, which is drive all the way to another state to cover a football game that didn't happen. So let people know about the most exciting part about covering Clemson this fall.
Yeah. Well, first of all, as you know, I'm a Purdue fan. So I watched Purdue lose to Minnesota in Tallahassee Friday night. I got down there just in time to watch that game and was sad and depressed and went to bed and woke up and thought I was getting ready to go cover a football game. And as I'm getting on the hotel to head down to the lobby, getting on the elevator to head down to the hotel lobby, I get an alert on my phone that the ACC breaking news, the game has been postponed. And I was like, oh, is that like for an hour? What are we doing here? And quickly find out, no, it's been postponed and eventually canceled. So I drove 7 hours to Tallahassee, watched Purdue lose, went to the team hotel and at least got an interview with Clemson AD Dan Radakovich, and then drove 7 hours back to South Carolina. So not the most fun Saturday I've ever had.
Well, that game was one of the things that prompted Dabo Swinney to have a couple quotes that everyone kind of went, oh, that was a little spicy. And, and he is someone who has managed to just tick off Ohio State fans more than just about any other coach, which is, it's kind of weird because they've only played him 3 times, I think. But the fact that the Buckeyes have never beaten him is undoubtedly a decent part of that. He is off to a great start in ticking them off already this week. Does someone else on his staff cast that coach's poll ballot for him? What's the story there?
No, so at least as of 2018, he made it very clear that he follows college football very closely. He casts his own ballot each week. He said a lot of times he'll call in at 3 a.m. to give his vote. That's something, at least the last time we talked to him about it a couple years ago, he said he takes very seriously. I went back and pulled up the press conference this morning, actually, and he was asked about Alabama and how closely he follows them. And he said, I follow everyone closely because my name's on that coach's ballot and I'm paying close attention to it and I'm casting it each week. Yeah, unless anything's changed, he still cast the ballot and I guess that's where you had the Buckeyes.
Well, it has been kind of amusing, even before the ballot thing came out, it was kind of amusing to see him pivot from discussing how teams who'd played fewer games, maybe shouldn't get in ahead of those who'd played a lot more, and then immediately praising Ohio State as soon as they got in as like totally deserving a spot in the field as soon as as soon as those games got announced. And then that is, again, something that you will see a lot of coaches do. Shifting from lobbying mode to PR mode. And so that's not uncommon, but there are always people calling him a phony like that. You see people calling him a phony more than anything else, like any other possible criticism of him. You always see Ohio State fans calling him a phony. You have spent a lot more time around him. So does Dabo get a bad rap? Does he kind of bring some of that stuff on himself for some reason? Like what? This is probably going to be the title of the podcast. What's the deal with Dabo?
So that's a complicated question. I think, some things he probably brings upon himself, some statements he makes and stuff like that. But, in this instance in particular, he said a couple of weeks ago that he felt like, Ohio State didn't belong in front of some other teams that have played more games and that the Big Ten waited to start the season. And he kind of felt like it would be hard for him to put them in. So, and that way, I guess he kind of voted with what he said. I know at the beginning of the year, he said that, it wasn't their fault and they should be punished. And so I know he's gone back and forth a little bit and who knows how many games any of us will play is what he said at the time. But he also did say, if they play 8 or 9 games, I'd have no problem with it. So I don't know if it's because it was 6 that changed his view or what exactly it was. But yeah, I don't know. I think Dabo is genuinely a good guy. I think he speaks his mind a lot and maybe doesn't do as much coach speak as he maybe should at times. Yeah, in this instance, I think it all comes down to how many games Ohio State played, and that's probably what you saw with his vote.
That is always a funny balance that, we always are going, oh, these coaches give us such boring quotes. You go to Big Ten media days, and I'm sure it's the same as the ACC, and it's just everyone's really good. We're a great league. Everything's fantastic. And it's like someone says something interesting, and then someone says something interesting, and you're like, oh my gosh, can you believe he said that? What a jerk. We're a complicated, we're a complicated species, the sports media person. All year long, this rematch, at least to me, has felt completely inevitable. Like, as long as there was an Ohio State football season this year, somehow the universe was going to find a way to put these teams together again at some point this season. Last year's game was just a total classic from beginning to end. So many interesting storylines. And it just felt like they've been at a collision course all season long. Dabo got asked on Sunday whether he considered Ohio State a rival. And I talked to Tony Gerdeman about this a little bit on yesterday's show, but is that how people at Clemson view Ohio State? Is that sort of the view down there?
I don't know. I think that Clemson fans like picking on Ohio State fans. I think just from the fact that they've won every meeting, and they even point out, like, y'all can't even beat our little brother. Y'all can't even beat all this kind of stuff. So I think that, part of it is just Clemson has had a lot of bragging rights over Ohio State when you look at beating them twice in the playoff and beating them in the Orange Bowl back in 2013, I think it was. So I think that there's some partly rival. I think, I think player-wise, it's not quite there yet, at least in my opinion. Maybe it will be after these next couple of weeks and after the game. But I think for Clemson overall, it's still probably Alabama as far as non-South Carolina, just because they played almost every year in the playoff other than last year. And then the fact that Ohio State hasn't beaten Clemson yet. So, I think in some ways, Ohio State's been looking to get revenge at Clemson and to get back and beat Clemson. And I think Clemson's been kind of looking at it as, we want to get back to the national title and win the national title, and not really worried as much about Ohio State or who they have to go through to do it.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who cover Ohio State, and I'm going to include myself in here, who think that this year's Buckeye team is probably not quite as good as the one from 2019. Is this year's Clemson team better than the team from last year? About the same, not as good? And what are the biggest areas of improvement from last year to this year, and maybe an area where they've kind of fallen off, where this year's team is not quite as good as last year's?
Yeah, I think it's a different team. So offensively, the offensive line is not as good. And then, they lost 4 starters off of last year. And then at receiver, you don't have Justin Ross and T. Higgins. So those are 2 huge losses right off the bat at receiver. Cornell Powell and Amari Rodgers are 2 guys that have really stepped up. Seniors who have really broken out this year and had good years. Trevor Lawrence, I think, is probably better this year. He didn't really go through the early season struggles he had at times. He's been more accurate overall. So I think offensively they're similar, but maybe not quite as good. Defensively, it's about the same. I mean, they don't have Isaiah Simmons, a guy that's top 10 pick, but they've been really, really good this year when they've been healthy. They've played a ton of guys. I think that defensively they're deeper this year. Secondary has been really, really good. Linebackers have been good when they're healthy. We've got a couple freshmen up front, Brian Brzee and Miles Murphy, who are 5-star guys that have come on really strong at the end of the year. So I think defensively they're maybe a little bit better. Overall, I think up front they're better than they were last year. But as far as offense, maybe a step back just without T. Higgins and Justin Ross, and the offensive line not quite as good.
Now, we will probably have a few more opportunities to talk to you between now and the game to preview things. I have a feeling we will find each other in New Orleans, as we did last year in Arizona. But just to get a couple things out of the way, I mean, you mentioned Justin Ross just a minute ago. There was a report a couple weeks ago that, he might be able to come back. He is, for those who might not remember, he is the super, super talented wide receiver. He missed all of this season with a neck issue. It sounds like then the report was wrong. He is, in fact, not going to be coming back for the playoff this year.
No. Yeah, the best case scenario for him, they're hoping that he'll get cleared for non-contact in spring. So he's been practicing, but he's still not ready for any kind of contact or anything like that. And I think they'll even ease him back next year if he does get cleared. But no, he won't be playing in this week or next week's game or in the championship game if they make it.
And just about the only thing that went wrong for Clemson during the ACC championship game was Nolan Turner, who is the guy who had the game-clinching interception in last year's Fiesta Bowl. He will miss the first half of the Sugar Bowl after a targeting penalty in the ACC title game. Losing a standout defensive back is probably not something Ohio State fans will be able to generate a lot of sympathy about, losing someone like that to a targeting call, given last year's game. But how big of a loss is that for Clemson to not have him in the first half of that Sugar Bowl?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the play he made last year. I mean, he really won the game, or sealed the win, I guess we should say, with his play last year. So he's a guy that came in under recruited, didn't have a ton of offers, didn't have a ton of interest, and has just played really, really well throughout his time at Clemson. So huge loss. He's been really good this year, like you mentioned. They've got some young safeties behind them that Joseph Charleston, Ray Thornton, that have been okay this year, but they're young, they're inexperienced, and Nolan, in addition to being a good player, he's also a defensive leader, a senior guy who's played in a lot of big games. Always seems to be in the right spot, making sure. I think he's kind of the leader of that whole secondary, the whole all four positions. I would say the whole back seven, but James Skowski is pretty much the leader there. But yeah, he's just a really good, solid player who has made some big plays in big games before that they'll definitely miss in the Sugar Bowl.
Well, Matt is a fantastic follow on Twitter, has written a lot of great stuff about Clemson this year. I mean, like I said earlier, this has felt so inevitable that I've been keeping a very close eye on the Tigers all year. And Matt has been my gateway to Clemson football all year. So Matt, let people know where they can find you on Twitter and where they can read your work.
Yeah, I'm at Matt at the State on Twitter. So all normal spelling. It should be pretty easy to find me. And then in thestate.com, the State newspaper in Columbia is where I'm based out of. So yeah, we'll have tons of coverage leading up to the game and from New Orleans. Going to be a different bowl experience this year, I'm sure, but still looking forward to it.
Well, Matt is as I mentioned, a fantastic follow on Twitter. Do follow him at Matt at the State. Matt is also a good friend of Tony Gerderman and I. So while you follow him, please be nice. Please represent yourself well while you follow Matt on Twitter. Matt, thank you for joining us this morning. Looking forward to seeing you in New Orleans in just a little over a week. Should be fun.
Yeah, can't wait. Thanks for having me.
All right. And thank you guys for joining us this morning. We have quite a week at BuckeyesScoop.com. We'll be talking to Ryan Day a little bit later on today. Should have a whole bunch more coverage all throughout the week for the previewing the Sugar Bowl, wrapping up the Big Ten Championship game, a whole lot more. Also, hey, it's Christmas, just a couple days. If you are looking for something to give or something to get, the finest thing to give or receive this season is the membership to BuckeyesScoop.com. You can just sign up right at BuckeyesScoop.com and sign yourself up for an annual membership, and you'll get the next 12 months of a whole lot of interesting stuff in Ohio State football. Just the next 12 days are going to be pretty interesting. You can only imagine how much stuff will happen in the next 12 months. That's all at BuckeyesScoop.com. Also, make sure you check out all of our podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. You can subscribe right there. Also, leave us a 5-star rating and review while you're at it. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.